Good Monday morning. It's November 27th, 2023. And we have an interesting topic today. Our lead topic is that Ukraine's top general has all but admitted that the Ukraine war is lost. We're joined by an individual who's got a great deal of expertise in European affairs, and particularly Russian affairs, Jim Jatras. Jim was a senior level Senate staffer for many years, basically as a career, and his family is very deeply involved in European politics. His mother was given a very high award by the Serbian government for her very, very diligent work in trying to spare Serbia from some of the worst abuses of the Clinton administration that launched an unprovoked attack on them by surprise, kind of very much like Pearl Harbor when we were hit in 1941. The United States hit the little country of Serbia, and just a very brutal thing. Jim, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Colonel. As always, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be with you.
Well, let me just start here with what has triggered this, and it's very interesting because there is an absolutely superb article in CNN.com. Now, I don't really pick and choose between which is conservative, which is liberal, but which tends to be accurate at the moment. And at the moment, CNN.com has sort of the best article that I've recently seen. What triggers it is that General Zaluzny, who is the commander of the Ukrainian forces, he's made some fairly forthright statements lately. And he told the Economist magazine, which Economist is very, very respected in diplomatic circles, and he expressed his very deep concerns about the fact that the war has ground into a stalemate, war of attrition. And he made this comment. This is a quote. He says, "Sooner or later, we are going to find out that we simply don't have enough people to fight." Now, this has always been an issue for Ukraine, which has a much smaller population, much smaller industrial base than what Russia does. And to me, there are tremendous parallels in this war between what's going on over there and what happened in the war between the states, where the South tried to secede. The North invaded the South at that time, first through Virginia, which actually is what triggered Virginia joining the Confederacy. I think serious students of the Civil War would have to agree that the Confederate soldiers in the early years of the war fought with just magnificent courage. They were well organized. They were just very, very skillful fighters. So it wasn't that they lacked energy or desire, but the fact is that the great majority of the industrial power was in the North. The North had several times the population of the South, and the North was able to blockade the South because they controlled most of the naval forces. If you look at what happens in Ukraine, Russia has a relatively strong blockade on the ports of Ukraine. Russia has the industrial base And what industrial base the Ukrainians had is now under control of Russia. The Russian troops have seized it. And the big thing is that the population disparity is similar to what you had with the North and the South in the Civil War. Now, as the war went on, very few people are aware of this, but the greater number of casualties were inflicted on the Union forces. About 58% of the soldiers killed in the Civil War were Union, 42% were Confederate. This was a big difference. 360,000 Union troops, 258,000 Confederates. The difference is that 102,000 more soldiers died on the Union side than the Confederate side. To put that in perspective, 102,000 is very close to all the deaths that we suffered in World War I or the combined deaths of Vietnam and Korea. You can look at either one of those. That's the magnitude of the additional deaths on the Union side over the Confederate side. But the fact is that the Union kept pumping more soldiers into battle. It was able to equip them, and in time, the Confederacy just simply was bled white and had to surrender at Appomattox. So that goes back to what Zaluzny said, quote, "Sooner or later, we are going to find that we simply don't have enough people to fight." And I think Robert E. Lee could have said almost the identical thing when he met with Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865. So, Jim, what are your thoughts on this from what you're saying?
Well, two brief observations. I agree with everything you said about the parallels with the American Civil War. We should note that, as you point out, Grant could afford to lose more men than Lee because he had more men to draw from. In the case of Russia and Ukraine, however, it's not the superior side that's losing more men, it's the weaker side. So especially that this is a war of attrition primarily by artillery, drones, missiles, and so forth. And the Russians have so much more ammunition, so much more artillery. They're losing far, far fewer men than the Ukrainians are. It's almost as though, to draw your parallel, Grant were losing a fraction of the men that Lee was. And again, he still got the superior forces. So that war of attrition is even more stacked than the American Civil War example. The other thing is the story we're getting out of some of the mainstream media, which, as we all know, this has to reflect thinking within some elements of the administration or of the bureaucracy, that this is, quote, a stalemate. Of course, it is not a stalemate. Stalemate means that neither side has the advantage. And it's clear that the Russians do have an advantage. And the real question right now is, how long will the Russians wait before they roll up what's left of the Ukrainian forces? I think the game plan, the extent to which there is one now on the part of the West, is to somehow cajole, trick, entice the Russians into some kind of a freeze or a ceasefire that would prevent them from moving on what now is their very clear advantage. Whether that will work or not, I don't know.
I think President Putin has been led down the primrose path too many times with the Minsk peace agreements that really had input from all the Western powers, particularly with Germany and France, but also with constant oversight from the United States. There was this agreement that after the coup took place in 2014 that overthrew the government of Ukraine and installed the predecessor to Zelensky, the idea was, okay, there's this war that has broken out with the Donbass republics and to some extent Crimea. We're going to put it all to rest, and so there was this agreement, and eventually, of course, it never really was implemented by Ukraine. They violated it immediately, just almost from day one, and so I think with that as kind of a background, there will be a great reluctance on the part of Russia to be led down that pathway again. I think Putin is a very calmly rational individual, and he's not the kind of person who can be tricked easily. And at this point, I think he recognizes that the West is losing their moral high ground. More and more people realizing that the West triggered this war deliberately, and that Russia really had no choice. They didn't want to enter the war, but they were forced. Something else that Zelensky said that I'll just mention here. I thought it was interesting. He said that Ukraine has tremendous difficulty training new soldiers because Russia is able to target the training grounds, the training centers, and so you put a bunch of guys out to start marching on the drill field, and the next thing a missile comes in and wipes them out. So Zelensky says we have limited capabilities to train reserves on our own territory, since the enemy has the ability to launch missile and airstrikes on training centers and training grounds. Seems to me that Zelensky, the general, is trying to signal to the West, and at the same time signal to the Ukrainian people, that this war is nearing an end. And you have to prepare a nation a little bit. And I see his comments as sort of laying that groundwork so that people will be a little less mystified by Zelensky's wild-eyed proclamations that we're going to drive to Crimea, we're going to have a blitzkrieg that turns the Russians back, and we'll march on to Moscow, or whatever he said. I mean, it's just, it's nonsense what Zelensky is saying. And Zelensky, I think he's a pretty solid general, pretty solid leader. And I think there is a method to his approach. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. And many people now are pointing out that there does seem to be some kind of a power struggle sub rosa in Ukraine, largely between Zelensky and Zelensky. Talk that Zelensky may want to remove Zelensky. I think part of what we need to understand is that I don't think Zelensky actually has all that much authority on his own. I mean, he's just a comic actor. I mean, the idea that he can give orders and people will obey them because he's the president, I think is absurd. That he's clearly being backed up by somebody. I can't help but think of that report in the Washington Post a few weeks ago, also known as the CIA's bulletin board, that Zelensky was the guy who was responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. I think this maybe is indicative that some elements maybe at Langley are still supporting Zelensky. There's a report in Moon of Alabama this morning about the personnel attrition in Ukraine. Now they have some units now where the average age is in the 50s now, and there's a push to really go full storm here and it started getting teenagers into uniform with, of course, minimal training. They would just be killed almost immediately. And then Zelensky and whoever's backing him up is still pushing for this. So I think, and some of this was attributed to British experts. So whether it's the CIA, the British, maybe some of the Banderist extreme nationalist elements are still backing Zelensky up against Zelensky. How this turns out, I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah, I'm very suspicious that that Zelensky's inner bodyguard may involve some American troops or CIA officials or whatever. I don't think his inner circle of guards is strictly Ukrainian, but that's speculation. What you say about the troops on the battlefield, I think I was seeing the other day that the average age of the Ukrainian army is something like 43, which is just astronomical. Just by way of comparison, when I served in Vietnam, I was a Marine lieutenant, and when we were defending the ridge line at Neuilly Lac Son, I was about 22 years old, and the guys looked at me. I was the old man, okay, and the company commander, he was a captain, and he was in his 20s somewhere. He hadn't reached 30 years old. We had a few. The company gunny had fought in Korea. He'd been around. He'd been in an ambush, and he'd walk around. He was half Apache Indian, half Mexican, and had very bronze skin. And he'd walk around bare shirted, and his entire belly was a mass of scar tissue from walking into an ambush in Korea where he was raked by machine gun fire. So we had a couple of older guys, but we had guys who were 17, 18, 19. That was the bulk of the troop strength. So you're talking about less than half the age of the guys who were serving on the front in Ukraine. The other day, I saw just a tragic short video, and it was Russian troops, and they had just cleared a trench line, and there were a number of Ukrainian soldiers who were dead lying in the trench line, and you could see the feet of the Russian soldiers, but mostly they were panning the ground in front of them, and there were a number of dead women, which it just breaks your heart to see this. And so you have these young women who, because there aren't enough men, now they're bringing women out, and they're lying dead. And you could, in watching the video, you almost could see a certain sense of reverence, or I don't know whether that's the word, but respect by the Russian troops who very carefully walked around the dead Ukrainian women. And it's just, the problem is that men can die in battle, but when the women die, then the progeny of the nation dies. I heard about a woman recently who ran with her hands up to surrender, and she was surrendering to the Russians. She said, "Don't shoot, I'm pregnant, don't shoot." So there are pregnant women, there are old men. There's someone over 70 was the commander of one of the tanks recently. So it's just a tragic situation where in order to run out the clock so that the most money can be drained off into Swiss bank accounts, we're just slaughtering the Russian people, or not the Russian, but the Ukrainian people. And it's heartless, it's cruel, and unfortunately, the people in the U.S. State Department, they are without morals of any sort, and without the slightest compassion for human beings. So it's a great shame. Well, Jim, perhaps we can shift to our second topic here briefly, and that is that in the Netherlands there has been a major shift in the government. It still has to be solidified, but Geert Wilders, the very conservative lawmaker, has won an upset election, and after a late surge based on his opposition to open borders immigration in that country. So would you like to comment on that a bit?
Yes, I mean, Wilders is a very well-known figure, largely on the immigration question, particularly about Islamic immigration into Netherlands. He's specifically said that Islam should be considered a violent ideology. He calls it an ideology rather than a religion, and that it should not be permitted in the Netherlands. He's going to have a real struggle forming a government, I believe. There are two smaller parties that, at least on paper, if he could get them into a coalition, he could form a majority. When he's got 37 seats, he needs 76, as I understand it. I've got to believe, though, that Brussels and Washington are going to pull every dirty trick out of the book to try to stop that. Bribery, threats, whatever they can do. In the meantime, the caretaker government of the current Prime Minister Rutte will stay in power. As I understand it, there's some legislation and some agreements in Brussels that, if adopted prior to the taking of office of any new government, would really clip the wings of the new government, because they would then be committed to various competencies being farmed out to Brussels rather than to the sovereign government in the Netherlands. So there are a lot of monkey wrenches that the you might say the establishment can throw into the works to try to prevent Wilders from being able to have an effective government, assuming he's able to form one. But the very fact that he did so well in these elections, I think, tells us a lot about the mood in Europe nowadays, that in more and more countries, people are realizing all this globalism, all these endless wars, all this open borders is destroying the European countries, and that something has to be done. And of course, that's why we get all this talk about, oh, the far right. I mean, look at what's going on in Dublin, for example, where, oh, the far right is trashing the country. They didn't care about the far left trashing these countries. That's been going on for years, and nobody cares.
Well, there seems to be a major shift afoot. Germany now is in its third quarter of recession. Not a deep recession, but it is a recession. There is a great deal of unrest within the German political system. Herr Bystrom, who is a prominent member of the AfD party, has come out and he has called for some sort of suspension or perhaps even withdrawal from the UN treaty on asylum and the protocols, the 1967 protocols that implement the right to asylum. There's absolutely no justification for any sovereign nation to be bound by a treaty that tells them who they can and can't let across their borders. I mean, that's just simply throwing away your sovereignty. I mean, what business is it of an American who the nation of Peru allows to cross their borders? I don't care. That's their business. I don't care. I don't care who Jordan lets across their borders, or Russia, or Germany. That's none of my business.
Yeah.
And but the problem is you have these globalists who rule the world, and they've decided that they want to extinguish certain races and ethnicities, and they're, by creating enough division and shaking the unity of nations, they know that at a certain point they can just have squabbling groups of people fighting one another constantly. And as long as the globalists control the money, the banks, the media, they can pit one group against the other. And once they've achieved all of this, they don't intend to really have serious elections of any sort. They don't intend that people remain sovereign. They've envisioned a global dictatorship of the elite, and the elite will be these mega billionaires, the boys from Davos, the trilateral commissions, all of these crazy groups that come together and come up with theories about how we can create a better world. We can do away with fossil fuels, and we can use sun chips and pinwheels and corn liquor in the gas tank, and the world will be wonderful. We can teach people that the sea is rising even when they can actually go out to the sea coast and look and see that the sea isn't rising, nothing's happening. It's all malarkey. But we are controlled by these people, and at least at this moment, there seems to be a diminution in their power, their clout. You mentioned Ireland. I just want to look at Ireland. Here was a country that was solid as a rock, powerful voice of Christian theology and so forth for many years, and then suddenly the globalists came along. They flipped things on their head. I just ran through some of the people who were making just fierce, angry remarks towards the Irishmen who took to the streets and had a very, very raucous protest, riots and so forth, because a 50-year-old Algerian immigrant had gone on a rampage at a kind of a kindergarten school, and he slashed, almost killed, she may still die, a 5-year-old little girl, slashed some other 5- and 6-year-old children, and slashed their young teacher, who may very well die of her stabbing wounds. There seemed to be almost no sympathy among the Irish politicians for the little children, the teacher, who hadn't harmed anybody. All of their venom was to lash out at the Irishmen who were upset about this unbridled wave of immigration from incompatible cultures. And so Ireland's prime minister is a homosexual, and he just goes wild on the people, and he's a pro-abortion atheist, and he brushed aside the public anger over the knifings, and he slandered the protesters, saying they're motivated by hate, and they brought shame on Ireland. The protesters brought shame, not the knife attacker. Then here's the let's see, who else have we got? We've got a Commissioner Drew Harris, who called the demonstrators a complete lunatic faction driven by far-right ideology. Now, it didn't occur to him that the Irish might have been not driven by a far-right ideology, but been upset at little children being slashed by a satanic monster. And here's the Irish Justice Minister, Helen McEntee. Here's her background. She campaigned for homosexual marriages. She's a radical leftist who promotes abortion and hate crimes laws. She supports gender quotas for political offices. And her crowning glory, she wants childhood voting rights for high school freshmen beginning at age 16. So, Ireland is run by the asylum, by the lunatics, and all of these people, the Irish Justice Minister lashed out at the Irish protesters as thuggish and manipulative. There's one other, the Irish president, Michael Higgins, he criticized the slashings and says it was reprehensible to attack the principle of social inclusion. In other words, you're not allowed in Ireland to be against having knife-wielding Algerians roaming around your country, knifing 5-year-old children. That's just a reprehensible attack on the principle of social inclusion. So, Jim, that gives folks a little bit to mull over, doesn't it?
Yeah, I saw a tweet recently saying that America is obligated to have open borders morally because we had slavery, and Britain's obligated morally to have open borders because they had colonialism. Ireland had neither slavery nor colonialism, but they're also obligated to have open borders. Ireland now, they have a law pending that would criminalize. You can go to jail just for possessing hate literature, even if you don't communicate with anybody else. Just possessing it can send you to jail. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, where ordinary Irish Catholic people, if they just have material that's critical of immigration, critical of Islam or LGBT or anything else like that, can end up in jail. That's democracy now in Ireland.
Yeah, it was President Herbert Walker Bush who started throwing around the idea of creating a new world order. And if you want to see the new world order, what you just mentioned in Ireland, where people can be imprisoned for having a pamphlet that opposes immigration, that kind of thing. The new world order does not have the freedoms of the old world order. The new world order is a global government where voting is meaningless, where there is no right to free speech. There is no right to practice your religion freely if you are a Christian. There is no right to trial. There is no right to jury. All of the rights that we have, and all of the rights that we had as Englishmen during the colonial period, all of those will be extinguished, and the only people with rights will be the billionaire jet setters who go to Davos, Switzerland, and places like that, and prepare the edicts for all the mass of humanity. I don't want it. I'm not going to accept it. And Jim, I know you're not fond of it. Your family have been enormous patriots, and we're always grateful for the sacrifices that they've made. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. I think there are momentous things underway, and we will keep you in touch with them. We will see you next Monday. This has been Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black, and we've been here with our friend Jim Jatras. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you on Monday.